morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right. Now, if we were in a different state, we may not be talking about pruning this time here, but Southern California, you can pretty much prune anytime you want. If you were in New Hampshire, they do not prune this late in the year because things don't heal too well once everything starts to freeze. So they would wait until late winter when it started to warm up again. But here, because we're pretty mild climate, this is a good time of year to do a lot of pruning. In fact, most of the tree trimmers are real busy right now pruning the trees so they don't get damaged by the Santa Ana winds. Now, before we get started on pruning, a little bit on how plants grow so you know what's going on here. So plants we'll be talking about would be mostly your woody shrubs and trees. Well, we'll be talking mostly about trees today. So the way they grow, they're actually in layers. So if you have the ground like this, and say you show 1 year's growth, a tree like this, what a tree is doing is it's putting on a new layer of wood and bark every year. So the next year you might have something that looks like this, but essentially encases the previous year's growth. When they form a branch, say 4 foot off the ground, that branch is always going to be 4 foot off the ground. The part of the plant that can actually stretch would be just the last inch or so, a few inches, especially if they're in a lot of shade. Then they'll stretch in response to the light. But pretty much any branch that's on a part of the tree trunk is not going to really stretch as the tree grows older. So the next year after this, we'll have something like this. Say you might have a branch forming up here. And they grow faster in the summer, slower in the winter, so inside they develop rings. Now, if you just take one section of a tree, say here, and you look at it inside, there's one part of the tree that grows. So if you were to cut a branch on a tree, you'll notice that there is a green ring under the bark. And that's called the cambium layer. So that's the area where the tree is actually producing new cells and actually growing. This layer here. Now what happens is the inside is called the xylem, the wood of the tree. And so the cambium layer grows cells on both two sides of itself. Those going inside become the xylem or the wood of the tree, and the ones growing outwards become the bark, also known as the phloem of the tree. So now on older trees, you'll notice that when young trees are young, the surface of the trunk is usually fairly smooth. As they get older, there are several things they can do. They either crack and get deep crevices, or they split off. And that's because when they're making this bark, when they're young, as the tree gets bigger and bigger, it starts stretching that bark. And the bark either has two choices. It can crack, like the cork of a corko, or it just splits off and is shed off like birches, or a lot of eucalyptus do that too. The bark just peels right off because it can't stretch any further. Yes?
Would it affect a tree's ability to perform, having the bark split off like that?
Well, it's supposed to do that. I mean, it's interesting. Some trees that I've seen, and some people have called me up, said this on peak trumpetry, it's real. It looks like the tree's splitting in half when it first happens because it's got smooth bark. And suddenly the bark has to split, and it splits real deep into the tree. It looks like the tree's cracking open, but that's just the fact that that bark can't stretch any further, so it does split and becomes part of the outside of the tree. So that's where that comes from. Now, in a tree, generally the water and the nutrients from the ground go up the tree through the xylem tissue, and they go, and whatever substance are made by the leaves, and you got to get, the tree has to feed its roots, goes down to the roots through the phloem tissue or the bark. So if you strip all the bark off the tree, it doesn't kill the top, it slowly kills the roots, which essentially kills the tree. So,
Really?
so you have to be careful with the bark. There's a lot of parks where the guys trimming around the tree don't do a good job, and they start stripping the bark with the string trimmers. It's a slow death to the tree.
I've heard of people using that to get fruit trees to bear better. Like
Yes, so interestingly, if you interrupt the bark of a tree, as long as it's not too wide, say on trees they will strip off about a ½ inch of bark on a branch, it'll heal back within the year to keep the roots alive. But because if you strip the bark off the tree, the energy that's made up on top is locked up there. Got no place to go. It's concentrated, so that helps the tree store energy and form flowers and fruit more readily. So, but it is dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. You can kill your tree that way too.
So our peach trees and stuff were getting too tall, so as soon as all the fruit was ripe, we trimmed them down so that they wouldn't grow. And then we had blossoms in August and it set fruit, just a few pieces, but we're going, oh, maybe we did the wrong thing by cutting it back in July.
Well, if you were in Minnesota, your tree would be in trouble because it would start freezing by September, but we have another 6 months before it gets too cold, so the tree will get the energy back that it spends making flowers and fruit by that time. I don't think you'll have to worry about it here. Here we can get 2 crops on a lot of plants instead of just the one because their growing season's pretty much year-round. So that's not too big a worry. Now the other thing to know is that plants don't really heal. So if you make a big cut into the tree anywhere, generally all they do is seal the area around it. So, if you cut your arm and it doesn't kill you, then your body will heal that and it'll look pretty much like it did before you cut it. But on a tree, if you make a cut into it, it never repairs internally. So it's always got this wound in there. The tree seals itself off by plugging up the tissue around it so the infection can't spread. And then what happens is as they grow older and older, they will just grow over the area. And in a few years you may not even notice it's there anymore as the new growth just covers it up. Now, and it just was in the last 50 years, 60 years, that they knew that plants don't heal internally. The U.S. Forest Department went around the whole country. They said the invention of the chainsaw really helped them out. Because before then, to dissect a tree was just a pain in the rear. They have to haul the whole tree over to a sawmill and have them chop it up so they can see what's going on inside. When they invented chainsaws, then the scientists went around cutting down trees to see how they were healing and all that, and they noticed, they don't heal internally. They just grow over the wounded areas. So any cut you make in this tree that damages the structure will always be there. It makes a thin layer over the surface that might hide it, but there'll always be a bad damage inside. And now if it happens when the tree is real young, like this tree, in 20 years when the trunk's this big, it's insignificant. But if it's a big tree that you make a big wound on, there's a big damage there in that tree. That will weaken it its entire life. Yes.
So if that defect is on this particular side of the tree, does that whole side of the tree get affected? Or is it?
Depends on the tree. So some trees are really good at sealing, and some trees are lousy at it. So supposedly the tree that's the best sealer that the scientists have ever seen, interesting, is an apple tree. Among all trees. It's an apple trees you can hack and hack and hack. They seal really well. So even though apple orchards are pruned like crazy, they said they often exceed 200 years in age because they seal so well. Now the worst sealing tree known happens to be another fruit tree, peach. They don't seal at all. You know, you make a cut the size of that branch. Essentially, you have a dead area that goes down to the roots the size of that branch. So in 20 years, you know, you got this peach tree that looks great, it's producing a lot, and suddenly it just breaks in half and falls over, and you notice the entire center of that tree's hollow. The entire center of the tree rotted out because of all the pruning damage you did. So, you know, it literally just kills the tree by pruning it, but it makes it more productive. So, in fact, modern peach orchards, they keep them in production for only 13 years. It says statistically, beyond the 13th year, the tree is so heavily damaged that the fruiting is compromised. You know, usually it used to be they would go to 25, but when they did the statistics, they said, yeah, after 13 years in production, it's not worth it anymore. You might as well plant something else and get full production again. So, so peaches are the worst. Some other bad ones though, most stone fruit aren't very good. Maples are supposed to be bad. Birches are really bad. A lot of the normally known as short-lived trees like birch trees, only 25 years in nature, they don't heal well. And I found that out when I was growing up. We had some 5-gallon birch trees in the nursery, and I decided, because they're over 10 foot tall, I decided to top all of them. Killed every single one of them. So I learned about that at that time. So they know which trees are worse than others. Yes.
Okay, so if you cut into, say, the right side of a tree and you damage the xylem, does that only affect the right side of the tree, or does it affect the entire tree?
Again, it depends how well they seal.
Okay.
Generally, it's just the one side.
It's just the one side, so it's dependent
Right.
on the side. So, like, the right side feeds the right side.
True.
Generally.
And a lot of times the roots, you know, a lot of times the branch is connected to just one root also.
Uh-huh.
So you lose one root, the whole branch dies on that side of the tree, and then the trunk of that side of the tree dies too, because the trunk is just a part of this branch going down to the roots. It's just the pipeline.
Right.
So you can see a gap on the whole side of the tree if you either damage the root or a branch.
Right, that's what I've heard. Okay, thank you.
My neighbor once cut an entire main root off of an olive tree because he was kind of uprooting the sidewalk. And the entire tree just died on one side.
Yeah.
And then it just grew back.
Yeah. Yeah, some trees are pretty resilient too. Yes.
How are figs and kiwi trees with healing?
Kiwis I don't know anything about. Figs are fairly long-lived. I would give them, you know, I haven't seen the research on that, but I would think they heal pretty well because there's some really old, quote, ficus type trees in nature. So, I mean, pomegranates are real old and long-lived too, and
What about mango trees?
don't know.
I heard of 1,000-year-old.
There's not a whole lot of research out there. You have to kind of do the research.
I'm not going to live long enough to see it.
Okay, so when you prune a tree, what's the proper way to do that? And this information is just from the 1970s and 80s. Before they had chainsaws and cut down and see what trees were doing, they would tell the forest people that really cut, well, let's show a drawing here of a tree. So generally on a tree, you look at a branch, how it comes to the tree. Now I don't have any old enough trees in the nursery to show it unless you come up close and look at this tree, but the branches in the trunk act like different plants. They have their own systems going. So the bark from this tree forms, the bark from the trunk tree forms, and they collide when they form. Right here, it's called a bark branch ridge. So the bark from this branch and that tree are colliding and making this little ridge line here. Now in the old days when they were pruning trees, like this was the German pruners doing the forest trees, they told everybody, oh, cut as close as you can, get rid of any protrusion off this main trunk when you cut this branch off, because then it can heal over there faster. So that's what we did up until the 1970s. We would flush cut these branches off. But what they found out is that the bark and wood of these trees comes out into this area, and then it goes back again. And if you flush cut, you can damage the wood of the tree and cause an infection inside that. So now what they're doing is telling you to go from this bark branch ridge and go, well, they tell you to do this, make a imaginary line straight down parallel to the trunk from the bark branch ridge, and then this angle here, you go out into the branch at the same angle, that angle, go out into the branch and cut it like that. From the bark branch ridge outwards to not hit any of the wood or the stuff coming from that trunk. So I probably didn't draw this good enough. The wood from the tree will probably go out a little further into there. So what happens on branches, the tree tries to cover it up as it grows. So that's why the wood comes out, because it's almost like it's covering this branch as it grows. And the branch is trying to stay alive by fighting off the wood of the tree. Now if the branch is insignificant, like this branch here is so tiny, that what happens after a few years is that the bark and the wood of the tree just cut off its circulation. That little thing dies. So if it's not getting enough light, a lot of the little branches on trees just self-die. Now they become knots in the wood. So you see a knot in the wood, that's a branch that got swallowed up. Even the branches that don't get swallowed up make a knot in the wood. And you know, after a tree's trunk is about 2 foot in diameter, this is a knot in the wood. That branch sticking out of the trunk is a knot. So
It's bizarre.
So anyway, if you're cutting off this branch, you cut along that 9. Now, if this branch is huge, if you cut it right there, you know, and that the weight of the branch, it'll just, you know, when you're halfway through, it'll just break off and strip off the bark. So what you're supposed to do when you have a real big tree and you want to take that branch off, is you cut here, cut there first to take most of the branch off. The bottom cut will keep it from stripping the bark off, cut it off there, and then cut it there. So there's not so much weight on the branch when you're cutting it.
Right.
That makes sense. Gary, is dieback on trees a result of self-preservation of the tree?
A lot of it is. Some trees, you make a cut and they'll die back on their own because they don't, well, they don't, some trees again don't seal well near the cut. They'll retreat a long way.
Yeah, well, you know, eucalyptus trees are famous for their dieback, and they drop limbs. You know, when your kids got killed, the herd up at the school.
I don't think anybody plants eucalyptus anymore. They're too dangerous. You
Yeah.
can't tell when they're going to fail.
No.
There have been a lot of lawsuits on eucalyptus. So anyway, if you have a little handsaw, you can cut down just about anything. But you have to be young to use a handsaw. I mean, I still remember in my 20s I was chopping limbs this big off of trees. Boy, it takes like 20 minutes on some trees with real hard wood, and you are just beat up by that. So it's a nice thing they made chainsaws. I mean, they used to tell us, don't use a chainsaw if you're pruning a tree. It's too messy on the tree. And no one says anything anymore because everybody got old.
Yeah.
I mean, with loppers, you can go to a branch maybe an inch, inch and a half. With pruners, 1/2 inch to, you know, finger thickness is about as good as you can do with regular pruners. So it's interesting. You know, the better pruners. You go into a hospital, they use the same pruners to cut through bone.
You handsaw?
I guess they're well made.
I mean, in the old.
So anyway, now, if you want to shorten this tree, what we are supposed to do to shorten trees is to cut it to a side branch. The reason for that, if you just cut this top off here, that's what we call topping. Now, you know, when the tree's young, topping a tree is not that bad. The reason it's bad when it's older, if you have a trunk this big and you top it, what the tree will do is it'll try to regrow that top within a year. So it'll have a branch that grows, so a new layer comes out and makes an entire new branch like this, but the layer of attachment on that branch is only going to be like a 1/4 inch of wood. 1 year's growth. And if this thing grows 20 foot, it just breaks off again in the wind. So it doesn't have a strong enough attachment if you top a big tree and it wants to grow back real fast. Like eucalyptus can grow back 20 foot in the year. Mulberry trees can grow 20 foot in the year, but they're only attached with one layer of wood. That's bad. Now, if you can keep this thing trimmed for 3 or 4 years until it gets 4 or 5 layers of wood, it's not bad. But that's the danger of topping trees, is that usually those branches break off.
What about those people who top work? You know, cut back the tree and then graft a ton on that.
Well, that's fruit trees. We don't worry about fruit trees killing people. We're worried about the trees that grow 40, 50 foot. Those branches come down, they'll kill somebody, but fruit trees don't kill people.
Oh, thank God.
So,
Don't they do that with avocado trees, just like cut them?
stump them, yeah.
And then it does the same, like what you drew?
Yeah, 1 year's growth's holding that branch up. So now normally what we do when we're cutting the top off a tree to lower it, we'll just cut the top off to a side branch that already exists. And when you do that, you just go right down the bark branch ridge. Because there's no wood from this branch above that line. So you won't be hurting this branch at all. When you cut it that severely like that, this tree will not resprout. Because this branch here is controlling the hormones coming down this wood, or the bark, and it will prevent any regrowth of this. I forgot to mention that. So on plants in general, each leaf makes hormones. The tip of the bud makes hormones too. Tip of the very end of the branch makes hormones that prevents any side bud. Now on a plant, normally at the base of each leaf attachment, there's a new bud ready to grow. What stops it from growing are hormones that are being shot down or let go from the tips. And it's all gravity fed on top of that. So this branch pointing straight up, the hormones coming around from the tip and all these leaves will prevent any side branching from developing until you cut the tip off. You cut the tip of that off, and suddenly there's not enough hormone to stop these side buds from opening. You'll get new growth coming out. The other way that happens is if this branch gets heavy enough and goes horizontal, the hormones don't travel down the stem anymore, and you get all this side branching coming up like this.
Is that sucker growth?
Not necessarily. Sucker growth is usually considered to be the growth that comes in from the roots or from real low on the tree. These, if you have a branch that does this and it shoots up side branches, that's called water sprouts. Just weaker than the rest than you want. So on a tree, on a shade tree, the strongest structure is supposed to be a delayed base. Now this tree here, we can make a delayed base out of. So what a delayed vase is a straight central leader with branches that go up in a spiral pattern to the top of the tree. So if you're looking down from the top, first branch is going this way, second branch going this way, third branch this way, fourth branch this way, all the way up the tree. Branches spaced well apart. Now, when trees are young, they've got too many branches. This has got branches all over. When this tree's older, now this is a ornamental pear tree, the biggest you expect these branches to grow is maybe 8 or 10 inches wide. So you don't want them any closer on the trunk than 8 or 10 inches apart. That's the closest you want them to be. But don't do that right away. The tree, you have a long time to thin this tree out. They're not crowded yet. But eventually, if these all are kept on the tree, and you see that a lot on street trees where the trees were trained to be a single trunk, then all the branches start in one spot.
That's stupid.
And when they're like that, within 20 years, you're going to lose most of these branches because there's no room for them to continue developing any size, any wood strength. when they're all close together like that, they start breaking off. On our street, the carrot woods are famous for that. All the branches start, 10, 12 branches in one location within a foot of each other. And over the years, they've just broken off, one by one, broken off. Fortunately, that tree's not big enough to kill anybody, but that's what can happen on big trees. So we like to make sure they're well spaced one up the tree. But again, don't do it immediately. If you start taking off all these little branches, now plants grow exponentially. So the more you prune at the very front, you're losing a lot of potential growth later on. It's better to wait a year before you do much pruning on any tree. These branches also help prevent sunburning on the trunk. Now, we're not an area that experiences a lot of sunburning because we normally we're not that hot every day like it is in, say, Texas, where it's above 80 degrees day and night, and sometimes well over 100 until, for 4 or 5 months of the year. But still, it's nice to have these leaves, the leaves don't sunburn, it's the bark of the tree that can. So, to prevent sunburning, keep a lot of little branches on there, but know what branches you want to keep as the tree grows. So like this branch here looks like a good keeper, but you'll have to figure, just look at the tree and see which branches make up that nice branching pattern as the tree gets older, then start clipping off the small ones if they don't fall off by themselves. A lot of these branches, again, the tree will shed as their circulation's cut off as the tree gets bigger. Now the ideal angles you want, so we don't like to see flat angles, because what happens, you get all this sprouting coming up, and these branches going straight up their goal in life is to become the trunk of the tree.
Oh.
So that makes the tree look real ugly to have another trunk growing off to the side like that. It's also very weak. So we don't want to eliminate the branches that are too flat on a young tree growing up. We want them to be somewhere between, now I saw one book that said 45 to, I don't know, most books will say you want the angle to be between 27 degrees and 60, well, it's 1/3 to 2/3 anyway.
Yes. Okay, so you mentioned about the whole everything's competing to become the trunk, right? So I heard,
Only if they're going straight up.
well, yeah, but what I mean is, I've heard of this weird thing where sometimes grafted trees will produce some kind of weird shoot that's totally different from one tree. Does that? Like a genetically one branch is totally different than the main trunk.
I'm not sure I understand that one.
Okay, so
We'll catch that later when we talk about
sorry
trees.
about that.
So anyway, they want the branches to be not horizontal, about 27 degrees from horizontal to about 27 degrees from vertical. That's supposed to be the nice range in there. 45 is right in the middle, but you want the branches to be not too straight up and not too horizontal as the tree grows. If they're too straight up, then they start competing with the trunk. They try to become the trunk of the tree.
I have a Valencia orange and a apple tree that I can't remember the name of, but they had several branches that were wanting to go straight out like that, and I took and tied them up to try and get them to pull up a little bit.
We'll cover that. That's fruit trees, and
Okay.
they don't fall into the rules that shade trees do.
Okay.
So this is kind of ideal for a big giant shade tree
Okay.
that you want it to be safe and pretty. So on those, we want the branches 27 above horizontal, 27 minus horizontal, somewhere in that range, just at least to start with as the tree's growing. So you want to do that in a spiral pattern for the trunk. Now some trees don't do this style of growth at all. There are some trees that do what is called the vase shape. The true vase is from one trunk to 2 to 4 to 8, and they keep multiplying that. That's what this tree here is doing. Is it's going from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8. It just keeps multiplying out, and there are trees that do that, and that's fine. Red bud trees tend to do that. A lot of the stone fruit trees tend to do that on their own. Just keep splitting up 2, 4, 6, 8, 16, 32. They just keep going. Not as strong, but it is natural for quite a few trees to do that.
It looks beautiful.
Now,
Marion do that?
some trees do some weird things in nature that don't make sense to us, like when maple trees grow, their branch pattern is from, so maple trees grow and they'll put on branches like that. They go from 1 to 3. And that's not only weaker, it's also kind of funny looking to our eyes. So on a maple tree, as it's doing this, what we do over time is pick out and save 2 of those 3. You can cut out the center and save the 2 sides, or cut out one of the sides, so that you create more of a delayed vase shape, that first shape that we mentioned. That's better for the tree and looks better too. But maples have this, maples often they just, you know, one of those branches dies on their own. That's kind of normal too. So you have to kind of fix some of the trees. I mean, there's quite a few trees that do this alternate branches on 2 sides like that. Ash trees do it. Quite a few trees do that. So we do prune on those a lot as they're growing up. Yes.
Anything special for California peppers for pruning? The smaller ones, like up to 10, 15 feet?
No, I would say follow the delayed vase. I mean, the books do mention that a lot of trees, they can start them with the perfect form, but they expect them to finally do something like that where they lose the center. And they said that's normal. Just don't fight it if they're doing that. They said maple trees do that. You try to keep them with this center trunk, but they eventually split open, and you can't help it. Oaks generally go straight up. Pines, of course, go straight up. Now, pine trees and conifers in general have a different style of growth. So if you ever, I know the guys in here, if you prune your Christmas tree, you know that this is how they do it. So they will have the branches all in one layer. But what we notice on pine trees and fir and a lot of the trees used as Christmas trees, their trunk widens out where the branching occurs. And then they get skinnier again between the layers of branches. So they seem to have enough room to put out and develop 10 or 12 branches in each layer. It's real interesting how they do that. They actually widen out there to make room for the branch attachment so they don't break off as the tree grows.
I saw a really bizarre pine tree at my school. I think it got struck by lightning, to be honest. But still, it had 2 main branches, 2 main trunks going together up towards the sky.
Good to remind me on that. Okay, so they often will keep a lot of branches in it, but you'll notice if you go into an old forest, in old forest you rarely see more than 1 branch at one point on the trunk. They just slowly fall off over time, but this is an okay structure for a conifer. Now, Matt there just mentioned, yeah. So some of the things you want to watch out for as trees grow is the double trunk. Now the Forest Department has backed down a little bit on the recommendation. So it used to be whenever they saw a forked tree like this with 2 trunks developing, they would consider this hazardous because the wood can't develop between them. It's developing on the sides, all the sides, but between them it can't develop. So if you're in a really wild, windy area, these trees tend to split down the middle. But they're finding a lot of trees in the forest that are like this for hundreds of years, so they have a second thought now. So now there are some conditions where it's not bad even when the tree's young. So if you see a tree that splits into 2, however, there is a bark branch ridge between them, that's okay. They're wide enough apart, the bark is formed between them. When you see this, and the bark is folded inside the tree, you know that this is an airspace in there. There's no wood in there. So in that case, this is more dangerous. However, they said they've seen enough trees standing with this that's not too bad unless this wanders to one side. This line wanders to one side, then no, this one's breaking off. So then they'll get rid of that. This is pretty strong. When you see the bark branch ridge between 2 branches like that, I mean the wood is developing fully between those 2. It's actually pretty strong. Okay, I think I covered most of the ornamental tree stuff. Generally, okay, one general point, the only time we don't like to prune plants is right after they put on the spring growth. So when plants wake up from winter and suddenly put on that first burst of spring growth, their energy level, it's actually the carbohydrate storage in branches is quite low. And they use the carbohydrates to seal wounds. So if you do a lot of pruning right when they're waking up, you can get a lot of dieback on the tree and set the tree back a long ways. So they say you can either prune it before the spring growth comes out when they're full of energy, or after the spring growth has hardened off, which, you know, it depends on the tree. So some trees wake up in as early as March, and by May or June, they've got their energy back that they spent on that new growth. You can start pruning at that time. If they are tropical trees, some tropical trees don't put on new growth until about April or May. Then you have to wait until about midsummer on those to do much trimming, or else you're going to cause some major damage or weaken the tree severely. So, yes.
Okay, so I want to prune a tree to create a shade tree, a canopy over a barbecue area. Okay. So, would you prune only once a year, only the major branches off, or no?
You can prune a lot. So the only time you don't want to prune is when spring growth is occurring. So you can prune in winter, you can prune in summer. Summer is supposed to be the best time to prune for Southern California because there's plenty of time to recover from that.
Okay.
The tree's most active, has the most energy flow going in the summertime. So summer's supposed to be the best, although fall it's full of energy too. And winter it's actually full of energy too that was stored all fall. So, you know, those times of year are better. Now again, if you're up north, you don't prune fall or early winter because when it's frozen, they don't see the wounds. Now in the old days, we did all our pruning in the middle of winter, anywhere in the country, because they thought tree's not bleeding, it's better for the tree. Well, now they know it's exact opposite. The bleeding is the tree's protection. So they don't, so we, you know, of course, here the trees always bleed when they prune because they're always awake or they're always active.
Okay, so if I want like a 7-foot canopy, I would wait. I'd keep pruning until the tree reached 7 feet, and then
Depends on
let
the
it start
tree.
growing out, or.
Yeah, it depends on the tree. Every tree acts a little differently.
But approximately, because you, like you said, the branches don't get any higher off the
Right.
ground, right? So just in general, that would be.
Well, like my redbud tree, I have a redbud tree in my yard that when he planted it all the branches were down there 3 feet. So as time went by, so we had a tree that pretty much was like this. So we waited 3 years and then we trimmed all this stuff off. And the branches up here were the ones we saved. The ones that started right around 5 feet are the ones that we saved. But we didn't do much pruning with these for a few years. We just left them there.
Oh, okay.
Same thing with, I have a marina strawberry tree that was real multi when I planted it. So it looked like a bush when we planted it. But 3 years later, there was enough branching going up that we trimmed everything off below 7 feet. So the canopy starts there, even though there's multi-trunks. Those multi-trunks were cleaned off by the 3rd year in the ground. So it's just smooth bark, and that's all we see.
But if you prune the lower branches, does it grow faster?
No.
No, it doesn't.
No. So each branch acts like a different
Okay.
organism. If you're restricting water or fertilizer, yeah, then it would. But if you give it ample water and fertilizer, then pruning this branch doesn't make that one grow fast.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, we'll switch over to fruit trees. So the modern fruit trees, pruning is kind of totally different nowadays than it was 40 years ago. So if you find a book at the bookstore called Pruning by Sanford Martin, which was written, I think, in the 40s, don't buy that one. Because what they say in there is not used much at all in the industry anymore. But they still sell that book. So let's take a tree, now this happens to be not a peach tree, but it's close related. This is a spicy nectar plum.
Oh, those are sale now?
I have one.
Aww.
But it used to be on peach trees, and it looks this looks just like a lot like peach trees. What they would do is take 5 years to get from one trunk to 16 vertical branch trunks. So they would go from one, and then a year later they'd have two, and a year later they have 4, and they have 8, and finally they had 16 of these things, vertical branches, and that was the structure of their tree. They don't do that anymore because that takes 5 years of the tree's life to do that. That's almost half the tree's life to develop the structure. So now orchards only work with between 2 and 4 vertical stems. And in Canada, they're just working with 1. So in your yard, it's whatever you want to do. If you just want one main trunk to go straight up. Now, so what on peach trees, what's going on is the branches that go straight up are just structural branches. They don't really produce any fruit. It's the branches that come off of these go sideways that makes the fruit. So you can just have one straight up branch and then the side branches for fruiting. Or you can have 2, or you can have 4, as many as you want. But the side branches, the ones that are fairly horizontal, make the quality fruit. Matt, you have a question?
Oh, sorry if I have so many questions.
You do. Go ahead.
For the peaches, do they usually die back from the fruiting branches?
We'll talk about that.
Sorry.
So anyway, so in your own yard, realistically, you don't want that many trunks or vertical branches in your tree because you don't want that much fruit. So if you had a peach tree that was about, say, 8 foot across, 8 foot tall, we're talking maybe 200 peaches that ripen over 2 weeks. If you can eat that many, good luck. So in most homes, it probably would be advantageous just to have the one trunk, a single trunk working straight up, and then go side branches off of that, because that's still probably 50, 60 peaches within 2 weeks. That's as many as you'd want. Now, the way we do it in our yard, we'll have a group of 5 peach trees in one spot, acting like one tree. So instead of having one tree with 16 trunks, we just put 5 trees in there, each with one trunk. So it's like one tree with 5 different upright trunks, each one making about 50 peaches, but over 5 different ripening periods. So you can get peaches that ripen in May, in June, and July, all the way into August. So you can spread that harvest of 200, 250 peaches over a longer period of time.
Gary, my question, I've got a pocket handkerchief, backyard, a patio, and we have one tree and 5 to 6 different varieties off that one tree to give us the same effect as having 5 different species, 5 different trees.
Right. So you can line them up either as one group to make it look like one tree, or you can just make a linear row of 5 different trees every 3 feet and train it. So the way we're training them, so you have this one trunk going up, and this could be just one branch, you can talk about one branch at a time, to about, most orchards don't have ladders anymore, so we're talking 7, maybe 8 foot max on the height of that branch. And then what you want is these side branches to come out fairly flat. Now they found out, if the branches are facing 2 upwards, they don't make any flower buds. So they want them to be flat. So most fruit trees in general store the energy to make their fruit in the fall. So if your branch, you actually can change how these branches will behave. If you find one that's too vertical and you pull it to horizontal this time of year, you can perhaps create a better fruiting branch for next year that way, just by taking it from vertical down to horizontal, giving it more sunlight. Because the energy is stored in the fall. Summertime, springtime, summertime, they're just growing, growing, growing. In fall, they stop growing and start storing the energy for next year's crop. This is the majority of fruit trees. Not every fruit tree does that, but the majority of them do. So get that branch down horizontal, the ones you want. You can, you're supposed to space them more in winter time, but this time of year, if you've got two branches that are right on top of each other and you can space them a bit, that helps them also. So if you want to do just that kind of work. Now what they found on peaches and nectarines is the branches that make the best quality fruit are between 1 and 2 feet long. So these branches coming off the tree 1 to 2 foot long will make your best quality fruit the next year. If the branch is normally shorter than that, what they would do, so let's say you had a branch here that just was a few inches long, what they would do is in the winter time, not this time here, but in the winter, they'll just cut it down to a stub. And then save the ones that are the right length, that are spaced well for fruiting that year. Now, what they will do, so when this branch grows the next year, it's going to grow longer and have branches on it. So normally what they would do the following year, and you have this branch will then grow back like that, and hopefully you have new branches coming out too. They will cut this one to a stub after the following year after it fruits, because they don't want the tree to grow that much bigger. Any branch you keep is going to grow 2 or 3 foot longer every year, but they don't want the structure of the size of that tree to change. So they will eliminate that one, cut it back to a stub, and hopefully it'll regrow in the right spot the next year in the same spot, and take its place again. So you're cutting the branches you don't want, not totally off, but making short, and hoping they regrow to become your fruity branches for the next year.
So what angle are you cutting the stub now?
It's just small branches. It's not a big deal.
And is it like 2 inches stub or?
Yeah, 1, 2 inches. Just leave some kind of stub there, and it often regrows. Makes a nice branch in the right spot. So I mean, when I was younger, I didn't prune my trees that severely, and they just got, of course, bigger and bigger, and they had crops, but they kept getting bigger. And then if you, at that point, try to make them small again, you're just down to huge branches that won't fruit. So it's nice to keep doing this constantly, keep exchanging those branches on the same structure so that you can keep it productive and the same size. That's the goal, is to keep it small and productive for a long time. Yes.
Where on this tree, if this was as high as you wanted it, or if you wanted it maybe even a foot smaller so you could reach the fruit, where would you cut it and how would you cut it?
Well, how you cut them is not as important anymore, but just where you cut it would be. I mean, this tree in the ground would be about 7 foot, so the height is pretty nice the way it is. You can, once you put it in the ground, you lose about 1.5 feet. Now, if this was in the ground like this height, you say, oh, I can't reach anything above here, just cut it to there right now.
And it doesn't matter where, do you cut it to the first flat branch then?
On a fruit tree, you don't worry about that much. It's only going to live a dozen more years.
Oh, okay, all right.
So it's not critical. I mean, if this was a shade tree, generally you do everything perfectly because that's going to be a permanent tree. I mean, anything you do to that part of the tree is going to be there 30, 40 years from now, but on a fruit tree, not that important to be correct. But yeah, you can cut it to this branch, save this branch as the top of your tree. I mean, again, this time we're not doing a whole lot of pruning, just planning ahead to see what we're going to save, and if you want to make this one more productive, lower it a little bit, space out the ones that you want to be more productive.
Gary, do you trim out the center of that so that it's more open? Get rid of the...
Well, this has too many trunks on it for this, for a single trunk method, this has got 3 trunks.
Right.
So you can work with 3 and make sure that they are well spaced and have the branching.
Right.
Because a lot of orchards in California look like a Y. They just have 2 two main branches, and it's just, the whole rows are like that, it's a Y going down there, or they work with 4. Some work with 3. So, you know, it depends on your crew, how you wanna do this.
So, I just wanna verify, and you might have just said it to this lady, but, so I have a Cadota fig that's probably the size of that I wanna make the size of that fig, can I just go across?
You can cut it right now, you'll lose part of this year's crop if you do.
Yeah, it doesn't really have that much left on it, fruit-wise.
So you can cut it now if you want, or wait until, normally figs will wait until winter to do the pruning. So we can mention that too. So peaches and nectarines are one extreme, so they are pruned the most of just about any fruit tree. They live the shortest life too. But, you know, you'll get good quality fruit when you do that. Now fig is another extreme. So fig trees, so we don't really do much with them this time of year. So on this particular plant, this is last year's growth, and where the leaves are attached from here up to the tips is this year's growth. Now figs grow fruit off of wood that comes on off of 1-year-old wood. So if I cut this tree this winter down to here, there's a good chance that I'll get branches off here, but it's a good chance they will not have any fruit on them, because this will be 2-year-old wood next year. So this winter, say January, if you're cutting this back, you need to save at least a little stub of what grew this year, which is this branch. So you save 1 node, 2 nodes. The node is each leaf, there's a line around it, we call it the node, where the leaf is attached, and there's a bud at where every leaf is attached. Occasionally there's not, but usually on a plant, wherever the leaf is attached, there's a bud that'll come out and make a new branch. So we'll save 1 or 2 nodes on each branch, and then that branch will grow, it'll grow 1 or 2 branches from that branch next year. They'll have fruit on them again. So if you see some of the older fig orchards in the wintertime, you look at them and they're just a big stump in the ground with these short branches sticking out the top. So they're pruning down to that little stump every winter so that they don't get 30 foot tall. A lot of figs want to grow that big. But we want to keep all the fruit within, most of it within picking height. So this tree still has this crop that'll form probably through November, even into December, so you don't want to prune it right now. But this winter we'll cut it back severely.
I have a pink tropic guava that was like really fat, and I last year cut it way back, like just down to this, and now this year I have no fruit. Is that what I did? Did I make it be not fruit?
Probably, but I don't know. I haven't seen the research on guavas to tell you if they have to have year-old wood to grow on. I would assume it does need year-old wood. Most trees do. Most fruiting plants fruit on off of year-old growth. So whatever grew this year will fruit next year. The majority of plants do that. Now, a few do not. A few that we know do not. One would be, if I brought it in, one is a jujube tree. They fruit on new growth no matter where it comes from. So this is a unique plant. So when I read that, I was reading in the California Fruit Growers Manual back in the 80s that they fruit on new growth. Might have been the 90s. So, and if they said in Afghanistan they harvest the fruit in the summer, within a few weeks they pick off all the leaves, feed it to the cattle, and then they chop the tree down and use it for firewood. And then the tree grows back from a stump and does the same thing the next year. They use the whole tree, they said. So I took my tree, which was about 10 foot tall, making fruit, cut it down to 18 inches, right about this height, and see what happened. And by the next summer, it was back up at 5 foot, full of flowers, making fruit again from a stump. So that one's easy to control, and you don't have to worry about it because it fruits on new growth. The other tree that can do that is pomegranate. So pomegranate fruits on new wood too. I mean, we've taken cuttings of pomegranate trees in the fall this big, and within a year those cuttings are making fruit. We're going, okay, that doesn't need any old wood, because there was no old wood. It was fruiting from a cutting within the year. So. Now grapes work the same. I brought a grape in here just because you mentioned the same thing. You have to save some of the current growth this coming fall. Now, grapes can grow 30 foot in 1 year, so, and you don't have to keep all that. You just have to keep the stuff near the base of the plant that you want. So if the plant wants to grow 30 foot and you don't want 30 foot of branch, just keep clipping the end of it off. But come winter, you save a little bit of what just grew. So on grapes, the old stuff is real flaky and gray, and the new stuff is smoother, not necessarily totally smooth, but smoother and lighter colored. And you need to save a piece of the current growth to get growth that'll put the grapes on next year. You don't have to save a whole lot of them. A lot of times, if you have a mature plant, you save one stem that of this year's growth that's about a foot long. Sometimes that 1 foot will create 6 or 8 clusters of grapes right in that area. So you don't need to save that many branches from a grape. I mean, the only way, grapes will produce no matter what. Well, they'll produce they'll produce with no pruning at all. The only reason we prune grapes is so they won't take over your yard. So that's why we prune them. We don't prune the fruit. They'll fruit better if we don't prune them, but they just get massive. So you just have to know how to prune them without sacrificing the crop. If you prune them back too hard, they'll still grow back, but you won't get any fruit.
Gary, is that the same for passion fruit?
No, I think passion fruit just fruits on new wood, new growth. I think you cut a passion fruit down to old wood and they'll still flower and fruit, as far as I know. Because they'll fruit from a seed-grown plant the first year, so they don't need old wood.
Question on the passion fruit. So I cut mine grew 60 feet in 1 year, 60 feet, okay? And I cut it back knowing that it grows on the new vines, but I cut it back so much, it got all sunburned and died, and I got a new one. But now how do I know for a fact I got the fruiting one versus just the flower one?
The name on the plant.
Yeah, I don't have the tag anymore. Because somebody goes, oh, that's the flowering one by looking at it, and then I didn't have the tag anymore, and I don't know.
All the fruiting ones I know of are white petal.
Okay.
The other ones, well, any passion vine supposedly can make edible fruit, but the normal fruiting ones have the white flowers with the purple filaments.
Yeah, the purple.
If it's because like they say, the ruby glow, which is burgundy petals, can make fruit, but you have to have the right pollinator for it. You can't pollinate itself, and the fruit will be good to eat, they said. So, yes.
Back to the fig for just a minute. I did cut mine in half, so it was only about 6 feet. And I had what I think maybe are water sprouts. It looks like a huge bush. It just, like in a 5-foot circumference, just everything shooting up from the base of that one, from the ground, from everything else. What do you do with that?
Well, you can thin it out a little bit so each branch has more, sunlight hitting
So
the
those
leaves.
aren't considered water sprouts then?
Well, they're not
necessarily?
suckers, put it that way. They're not suckers.
Okay, so those are good. Those are okay.
They'll make fruit.
They're beautiful. Okay, all right.
Fig trees are not grafted, and I don't know of anyone who grafts fig trees. I mean, some private homeowners graft fig trees, but in the trade, generally fig trees are grown from cuttings, so anything that comes out of the dirt is still part of that same fig tree, and it will fruit. Any other questions? Let's see. I did bring a blueberry plant in here. So on plants like blueberries, they operate the same way as fruit trees do. And what this thing is doing is, this year it's making this new branch, and this new branch, and this is a new branch too. The most productive time of this branch is the second year. So next year, this thing will look like a continuous string of berries going all the way up the stem. So they're real impressive when they do their thing. As the branch gets older and older, the area of production gets shorter and shorter. So they say, you keep these branches for this is about a 5-year-old plant. You keep, the oldest branches should be only about 5 years old, then get rid of them so that you can make more room for these. Now, the problem we have is some blueberry plants don't like making new branches. This one does. So it's quite nice, but I have some other ones, after 5 years, they haven't made a single new branch yet. You just have these real short pieces on the old branches. I'm waiting for the new growth to come out.
What
But,
kind is this?
Yeah.
This is star blueberry.
I've never seen one so
I
big.
haven't seen stuff.
Oh, you have to look at our 10-year-old blueberry plant out there. It's about 8 foot across. So this is still not a full-size blueberry. This is, you know, full-size blueberry is 5-6 foot high and wider than that in the ground or in a big
Wow.
pot.
So Gary, where would you prune that one? Would you
Well,
wait
we've
till-
already pruned this actually, so we pruned out a lot of the oldest wood. But probably next year I'd probably get rid of this branch because these will side branch and fill that space. So this one can go.
How far down do you get rid of it? Do you
Oh,
get
this
rid,
all the way
right
down.
to the,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, we cut a branch off all the way down to here already, some branches already down to there that were, you know, kind of mixed in with this group. But this one should be in good shape for next year now.
Can those be topped, okay?
Sure.
Keep the height down?
Yeah. Yeah, the problem we have, because this is only a 10-gallon, quote 10-gallon, which is really like 8, container, is that it can dry out within a day if I let it get too big. And then when you let a blueberry dry out, it's serious. It takes like a year to recover from that. So you don't want them to dry out. So we're trying to keep it small so it doesn't dry itself out before we water. You know, we're watering it pretty much every day. So in containers, yeah, the other reason to prune them is so they don't get too big and dry out.
How long will it stay in that container, Gary? Before repotting?
Probably a few more years.
Okay. And what about your spice tree here? How long before that needs to be repotted?
Soon. I would say within the year, get it out of there. It's too big for that pot.
Is that an apple tree behind there?
Yes, okay, yeah, good question, so, good point. So this is an apple. Apples, again, are the longest lived fruit trees because they seal well. Now, when apples are young, pretty much their flower buds are at the tips of each branch. So this is one tree we like to prune this time of year if you want to lower it a bit. So during the fall, the leaves that get the most sunlight, which are usually the ones at the very top, will make flower buds. If you left this 10 foot tall in the winter and then decide to prune it down to 6 feet in the middle of winter, then you've just cut off all your flower buds. If you cut this down to 6 feet right now, it'll develop a flower bud right at the tip of that branch by winter, and you'll get your fruit off of that. So, you know, the Sanford Martin book that I told you not to buy, they said, well, for an apple tree, you want to develop a nice open vase. Now, the open vase shape is not used much in farm. It's the old style. So what I would do is I had this apple tree in my yard, which was called, what was the one that Bob in Whittier? He developed this apple tree in Whittier. I can't remember the name of the apple now. It's got his name on it. But anyway, the thing would make 2 branches every year that were like 15 foot long. I'm going, okay, so in the wintertime now I'm supposed to cut it down to an outside bud so that new growth would come out, form an open vase. So every winter I would cut the tree down to about 3 foot, and every year it grew the same 2 branches straight up. And after 5 years I got nowhere with this tree. No fruit, nothing, just the same 2 branches I was cutting back every winter to try to get that open vase shape. Well, so that turns out that totally wasted my time, because what I should have done is cut it down to 4 foot tall at the end of summer and develop the flower buds right there. It would develop fruit the very second year if I had done that. Just trimmed it down before fall started, or right early fall, and then it would develop its flower buds right there, and that would flower and make fruit on that branch the next year. But here I was trying to force this tree to open up, and it wouldn't do it. So I dug the tree out and haven't planted it again, but it wasn't a very good apple anyway, the Gordon apple, Bob Gordon. Yes.
I've got a open center design where I cut it about 2 feet above the ground, and those branches have come up, and from there branches have gone vertical, and they're all around 4 to 5 feet long now. So you're telling me a good time to prune it would be right now. Select the branches you want and prune it to the length you want.
Yeah, prune it to the height you want the flower buds to be at.
Yeah.
Now, as apple trees grow older, they do something a lot of other trees don't do. Now, a lot of trees do it too. So as the apple tree gets older and the branches start to drop down from the weight, they start developing a lot of little short branches on the interior of the tree. And these are called the fruiting spurs. So these are branches, and each one makes fruit, flowers and fruit too. And the fruiting spurs on apple trees become their best fruiting branches. Mainly because when the apples form at the tip, they get sunburned terribly. So as the tree gets older, you don't worry about the tips anymore. When they're young, that's the only place you can get your fruit. But as you get older, you get these short branches working on the inside, and that's where your best fruit is. These little short branches will often stay in production for 5 years or more, and then they often get ugly and break off, and the tree grows more. So you just work with those as the apple tree ages. That's your fruiting areas inside the tree. Those apples there don't sunburn.
But you're not talking about those, like your branch, and then you've got all these guys that.
We don't. Well, the water. Well, if it's a young apple tree, they often, if you force the
Not
branch
yet.
down, they often make water sprouts that come
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
You just keep chopping those at about 6 inches long. Just constantly cut them at 6 inches. By mid-fall, they stop growing and they develop flower buds on those, and you can use those as fruiting. Because most apple orchards now don't look like trees anymore; they look like espalier plants.
Yeah.
So they grow the branches horizontally and just take the spurs off of that, or they often do that sprouting, that water spouting thing, and they just keep chopping them back to that level of that line, and then they'll fruit right there.
So you're speaking about in California because when do apple ripen in California?
Depends on the apple tree. So the earliest ones ripen end of May, beginning of June.
Okay.
And the last ones will hang on the tree, like Granny Smith will hang on till February the next year.
Because you don't want to cut while it has fruit on it.
True.
So for California, yes, you cut in fall, but for example, for this Granny Smith, you would cut in winter.
True. I mean, yeah, they say to prune apples right after the fruit's off. Well, sometimes that's winter for us. So, I mean, apple trees here often don't even go to sleep. So,
Do they lose, I never lost their leaves last year.
right. So a lot of apples need a frost to lose their leaves. They do grow apples in the Philippines where the temperature never drops below 55. So in those areas, what they do is they strip the leaves off when they want them to bloom again. So you'll notice that apple trees, even in the middle of summer, will bloom if you let them get a little too dry and the tip leaves fall off. They bloom, and they make another crop. Or at least they'll try to make another crop. Some apples succeed, some the fruit turns out small, although it still tastes good. But whenever they lose their leaves, the tip buds are free to open up if they're there. So what's stopping them is the foliage around them. So on a lot of apples, if you still have leaves, now most apple trees are due to bloom April or May. Granny Smith, John and Gold, Fuji's, they usually bloom here around April, May, or June. We have an extended bloom period on apples because we don't have enough chill for them. There's no distinct winter. So they say in Oregon they'll bloom for 2 weeks. In Southern California they bloom for 2 months because they can't figure out the weather. So we have they have an extended bloom period. So on most apple trees, if the leaves are still on there by the end of March, strip them off. And it's real easy to strip them off. You just put your finger on the branch like this and just drop down the branch and they just all pop off.
You said that's the end of March?
Yeah, I mean, if you leave the leaves on there, they'll just get more and more energy stored up. So the longer you leave the leaves on, the better it is. So like in the Philippines, what they do there, they're growing this apple called Rome Beauty, which is not, it's from New York. It's not supposed to have any chance of growing in the Philippines, but they do it. So they have a crop and they pick it. 2 weeks later, they just strip all the leaves off, they said. And 2 weeks after that, plants are in full bloom and make another crop. So every 6 months, they have another crop. But they, you know, they don't get cold, so they can crop it year round. We don't, you know, we get a little too cold that past October to develop another crop. So you have to have one that starts earlier to be able to do that.
Does this process follow through with plants that were bred out of Australia and places where it takes less days of cold to do an apple?
Well, the apples from Australia, Granny Smith and Pink Lady and Sundowner, seem to like colder winters better, but apparently they don't need them. So they'll work both ways.
Right.
Because we notice if we get Granny Smith apple trees from Northern California sent down here, or Central California sent down here in the wintertime, they'll bloom out in March or April. The ones that are overwintering here often don't bloom until May or June. But because they can hang on the tree for so long, they ripen in fall and winter, then we've got enough time to ripen those. The one we don't seem to have any time for is Honeycrisp. So even though Honeycrisp, you can make it bloom and start its crop, it's supposed to be ripened by late August. And that only gives them like a month or two to develop, so they never get bigger than a golf ball. So that's the only problem we have with some of those high chill, early ripening apples, like Honeycrisp, don't make it here. But
The galas though do, right?
galas do fine.
And Fuji.
And so Dave Wilson Nursery, who's the biggest supplier of fruit trees in the United States, had so many conflicting reports about Southern California. They planted all the apples in their catalog in Irvine. I don't know how many years ago it was.
But they've been out there for how long now? Like when we were testing, about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, 30 varieties.
Yeah.
They bought a lot of ones from that were for cold weather. They're testing them.
Greater than 500
They're
hours.
testing them out.
Yeah. So they found out that everything produced well except for two, Honeycrisp and Liberty would be the two they wouldn't recommend, but everything else that they put out there was producing a decent crop.
Yeah.
So you can grow any apple you want essentially, except for Honeycrisp and Liberty. So,
When you were talking about pomegranate, I have a smidge of a non sequitur question, but, so I have gigantic pomegranates, and I heard one thing is, if they get cracked on the outside, then they're done. But it conflicts with me, like, if you could pull it off easily off the tree, then it's done. So they're cracked, but I can't pull them off easily. Are they done? They're done just because they're cracked, but I have to yank and yank.
I don't like to wait till they crack, just pick them.
Oh, so, okay, so they're good now then.
A lot of
Even
them,
though I
I mean,
can't
there's some that ripen later, but most of them are ripe now.
Okay.
On the chill, they all ripen, but do some do better or have more consistency? Like Hannah's known to have a low chill. Is that should that
Okay,
be
so
considered?
the big thing about apples that they know, this is gonna be a subject for about a month from now, but it's not too long. So one thing to know about apples is the quality of the apple, the fruit is much better if it's not 90 degrees for 2 weeks before they harvest them. So the apples that do the best here quality-wise, now if you're on the coast, any apple works, it's just not that hot there. So on the coast, the apples ripen late summer and early fall. Fuji and Donegal do wonderful, but inland they suffer a lot from the heat. Although they still do fine, the fruit quality is not as good as the store. But people who have Donegal and Huntington Beach and Fuji and Laguna Niguel tell me this is the best apple in the world. They do really well near the coastline because it's not so extremely hot. The only apple that does well ripening in heat seems to be Gala. Ripens well even in August when it's super hot. But Anna ripens before it gets hot, and then Pink Lady, Granny Smith, Sundowner ripen after the heat. They ripen November, December. So if you're inland, the early and the late apples tend to be better than the ones that ripen mid-season, which is September, October. Plus the apples that ripen September, October, well, August, September, October tend to get the most worms. Whereas the apples ripen early, we never see worms in those, and the apples ripen real late, the worms aren't around that late in the year either. So the early and late ones seem to be better.
Gary, when you tip an apple and you force the flower out of the end of it, you get a cluster. So the fruit develop. How do you thin the fruit?
Cut all but one.
Cut all but one.
So if the weather's warm and there's a bud here and you strip the leaves off, it'll bloom. If it's middle of winter, it won't make it bloom. It's got to So a lot of plants, it's gotta be warm to get the flowers to open up. Just trimming the leaves off doesn't do it on a lot of plants.
Can you describe pruning dragon fruit?
Before you do that, can I ask one more question about fruit trees?
Okay.
So would you also, if you still had leaves on plum trees or peach trees or nectarines, strip those leaves off too if they didn't fall during the winter? Or just apples?
I've never seen it on any other tree except for apples. Even those hot winters we had, everything else dropped its leaves, but the apples did not. Figs, I mean, we had those 2 hot winters, we had a lot of fig trees that were evergreen and ever bearing for a couple years. They didn't stop growing and they didn't stop bearing fruit. So apparently figs don't need any cold at all. I mean, we have one customer who would buy figs from me here and take them to the Philippines. He says, yeah, in the Philippines they fruit year round. The problem they have is when they have really bad monsoon rains, it kills the tree. They said, if it doesn't stop raining for a couple months, which sometimes it doesn't, the leaves get so diseased that it just kills the plant. So he comes and buys new fig trees every once in a while and takes them back to the Philippines. But he says, yeah, it's different over there, they don't stop.
The rainy season.
So on dragon fruit, the only thing we've read is that if you prune the branches back, because there's no leaves, it's all branching, you prune the branches back mid-spring, it makes them bloom faster and better. So I've done that where you prune off the ends, make them more compact. It's what you have left wants to do something, so it often blooms better.
And does it only grow on the new? Does it fruit only on the new?
Well, on a dragon fruit branch, they have these little points where the thorns are attached.
Right.
And each one of those is a potential bud, either for a flower or a branch, and it can only do it once. So if you use up all your buds and they all bloomed out, you can tell because they have little stems sticking out of them, then that branch is done for its life. You might as well get rid of it. Make new branch. I mean, they make new branches so well. It's like,
Yeah, they totally do. Okay.
and you can cut them anywhere because it's just a branch. The whole thing's a branch, although they have joints. The whole thing's just a branch. Yes.
Were you gonna talk about citrus?
Oh yeah. Totally forgot about those. So on citrus trees, normally they prune. Well, they prune in summer and winter. I see them pruning all summer long. So citrus, you can just hedge them. And the main thing with citrus is that if you go beyond the last leaf on that branch, then that thing won't produce fruit the next year. But if you're pruning them and there's still leaves on the branch, it'll still bloom the next spring on that branch. So you can prune them fairly heavily without worry. So they're often just hedged. So you drive through the Central Valley in the summertime, and a lot of times I'll see these trucks going through the groves with saws attached to their sides.
Oh my God.
And all they do is they just hedge the plants. You know, they have saws cutting off the top and the sides, and that's how they do it. They don't, no one's in there with hand tools or anything. They just machine prune those trees.
Is cleaning out the center of those trees old
It's
style?
not done anymore, but it probably does help. So the question, what's going on? So on citrus trees, they used to do 2 things to them. They'd skirt the branches on the bottom, so they wouldn't touch the dirt. So they would skirt them 3 feet off the ground because bugs can climb up those branches and get into the tree, snails, and disease can splash up onto the bottom branches and make the fruit bad. So they used to skirt them at 3 feet off the ground, and then but you know, there is fruit down there, so they wanted to see if the skirting was economically productive. And they found out it wasn't. Because even if they got damaged fruit down low and bugs in the branches, they're still getting more fruit on the tree than they were without. So they're getting more money back from not skirting the trees than from skirting them. Now it looks prettier to skirt your tree rather than have everything dangling on the dirt with holes in the leaves and snails. So skirting them is still prettier. And then they also were testing the theory about not taking out the dead branches. So the dead branches, the problem with dead branches is that when it's raining a lot and the water drips off the dead branch onto the fruit, it makes these brown stains on the skin from the fungus that's coming off the dead branches. So they wanna see if pruning out the dead branches actually made economic sense, and for the orchard it did not, because it cost them a couple $1,000s an acre to do all that pruning work, and they weren't getting that much more money on the fruit. So it wasn't economically sensible to prune out the dead branches, but I would think in your own home, pruning out the dead branches, if you do it yourself, would be helpful to the tree, not to have that dead stuff in it.
Could you explain what you said right at the beginning about not cutting off the end of your branch where the fruit's gonna grow?
Well, I mean, if you have, say this is the winter time now, and you got a flower bud right at the end of this branch, you prune them in the winter time and cut them down to here, you lost your flower bud. So you don't want to prune the tips off on an apple tree, unless it's an older tree and you got spurs in the middle. But on a young apple tree, if you prune them in the winter, you're losing your flowers. Citrus.
What you said about pruning the
Well, on a citrus tree, you can cut it quite a bit, as long as there's still leaves on this branch left after you prune it, it's still gonna flower next year.
Oh, okay.
If you prune it so far in that you're down to an area where there's no more greenery, it'll take a year for that growth to then make fruit again.
And so do you prune it after it's harvested?
Well, a lot of citrus always have fruit on them, so you just prune it any time.
I have a mandarin orange and it seems to only harvest like every December-ish.
Right. You can prune it, well, I would say prune it in winter on that one.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, a lot of citrus, there's always a crop on the trees, so.
I have, 2 grapefruit trees that are like a foot tall. Like, what's the deal with that? Why don't they get taller?
You buy them from us? So the problem we have in the industry is that all the retail citrus that we've bought from the wholesale growers that sell to retail are grown in something that orchard would never do. So they're growing in sawdust or
so change out the dirt.
right, you have to change out the dirt, because that's done some. So my parents back in the 60s planted up, like 10 citrus trees in their garden, all from the retail suppliers. And for 4 or 5 years, they were just struggling. Just 10 leaves, 20 leaves left, dead branches all over. And slowly over the next 4 or 5 years after that, they all came into full production, got real nice. And I thought when I was growing up, citrus just take 10 years to get going. But I bought a house in the 80s, planted citrus trees from an orchard supplier. Within 1 year, they were this big, this wide head crop. I'm going, okay, what's wrong with retail stuff? And that's what's wrong. They don't know what they're doing because they listen to the people telling them to grow this stuff in sawdust instead of, because the stuff I had bought from an orchard supplier was just in dirt. It was just in plain old dirt, put in the ground, boom. And the stuff in retail is all in compost of some sort, and it just struggles with that.
Thank you.
So, yeah, you can pull the tree out, but usually they recover. I have a tree now in my yard 10 years after I planted it, because I didn't change the dirt on it. And it looks great, still hasn't put a crop on though.
Mm-hmm. Mine's producing, but like 2 pieces of grapefruit, because they're a foot tall.
Well, you can do this where you go in next to the trunk and pull out all the original soil out and just bare, get the roots bare. That's okay. Citrus can handle exposed root systems. Now back to fruit. Any other questions with fruit?
If you've got a little baby tree and a citrus, is it better to take the fruit off of it so it'll grow bigger? What's the theory on that?
I haven't seen any theories on it, but we know if a branch has fruit on it, it doesn't grow.
If it's too heavy, maybe take
No, it's
half
taking all
of
the
it off
energy.
or something?
Yeah, just take it all off and it grows. So because we used to grow our own citrus trees for a while before they had all this stuff going on. And we would get these little liners in, and we knew if they had a fruit on the end of that tree, because we only had one trunk, one branch on it, if it was making flowers, it wouldn't grow at all that year. Take that thing off, and it would grow 2 or 3 foot. So in order for it to grow, yeah, you take the fruit off on that one branch. I mean, the fruit doesn't affect other branches, just that whatever branch it's on, if it's fruiting, it's not growing. It's putting all its energy into that one fruit. So if you want it to grow, yeah, just take the fruit off.
Say one more question about, a lot of my trees had a lot of dead stuff inside. And if that's removed, would then, do you think it replaces, or is it just good to get rid of the dead stuff inside?
Well, they found it wasn't economically
No, but I mean, what do you think would happen if I did it?
I'd take it out of there so that there's room to grow more branches.
But
in
would
there.
that, is that what it would do? It would sense that it wasn't there and put something new in there?
It wouldn't sense it, but it would just grow wherever
I
there's
like
light.
to think it's the
Yeah, really.
Yeah, the leaves grow where there's sun, so if there's more sunlight, it will grow better.
So if you have some branches on citrus that come out above the graft, but they grow really fast, much faster, are they okay to like kind of try to get them away from the trunk so they'll get more light, or should
Yeah,
they
if
be
there's,
trimmed?
well, yeah, I noticed that when I used to grow citrus trees a lot when I was younger, you'd get this plant that was fruiting and flowering at about 2 feet, and suddenly the thing would just send up all these stems from within this, not a sucker, but within that, and go 3 or 4 feet higher. And then what these would do is they would then make a new layer up on top of flowering and fruiting, and all this stuff would just die away. And then it would do it again, make a new layer above that. So they just kind of staircase their way up there. So that's typical. I mean, you can, if you want to make it prettier, cut off and just leave one and let it do that, or you can leave several and space them out so that they have room.
What about one that's coming up from just like 3 inches above the graft, so it's, you
That's
know,
fine.
2 feet below whatever other branches?
Yeah,
That's
sometimes that
okay?
becomes the main trunk.
Okay.
Now you'll notice on citrus anyway, when they do send up these new sprouts, that they're they act very juvenile. They've got the big thorns, they're webbed and everything. That just shows juvenile growth coming through. That's what they do when they do that. And then all the side growth off it is more cylindrical branches, no thorns, and they start production on those. So that's normal on citrus. They do that juvenile stuff and to get some more height. Yes.
You mentioned about you planting your citrus or whatever fruit tree it was in the dirt and how well it did. Okay, I have a couple of one Meyer lemon example in a pot, and I've had mixed messages on what to plant it in, either almost like that cactus mix, which gives major
Oh, you haven't
drainage.
been here before.
Here comes the soil.
He did his soil.
Or potting mix. I mean,
Yeah.
even when I go look at succulents, they're in a potting mix
Right.
when I buy them, not in a succulent mix.
So our main talk that we give every 2
I
months
missed
is on
it.
soil.
Missed it.
And we know that soil is basically quartz. And what they sell as cactus mix doesn't look anything like quartz to you. It's all just ground up trees. It's got a little more volcanic rock than most potting soils, but it's not anything close. So the soil we sell to grow plants in looks like that. It's mostly the same material as soil is made out of. So it's silicon dioxide or quartz, volcanic rock, sponge rock, sand. And that's what plants want to be in. They don't want to be in a dead tree chopped up. So most potting soils out there, someone chopped up a tree, ground it up, and said, this looks like good dirt, and it's got all the nutrition that this plants need because it's a dead plant chopped up. Or your plant's in there, but it's not true.
Yeah.
Plants don't like to grow in dead bodies. So we sell a soil, and like she was mentioning, you want your citrus to recover. Like what we were doing is we were buying trees from the retail suppliers and shaking all that soil off, putting ours on it, and then it no longer suffers from overwatering or anything that related to rotting roots. Because they're telling everybody, like cactus, in nature, you can water them every day. They don't rot in the desert.
Yeah.
They get those monsoonal rains that just floods them all summer. They like that because they're, the sand that they're in won't rot them. And if you put them in our stuff, yeah, we can water them every day. They grow like a weed.
Okay.
They don't rot.
Great.
The other stuff's all right as mulch, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just dead plants. I mean, I hate to use those terms anymore, because they're euphemisms. Mulch, compost. It's just a dead body of a plant. It's not what the plants want to grow in. They want to grow in quartz.
But they derive their nutrients from the breakdown of those products, don't they?
Right, but they're not the ones that do the breakdown. That's the problem. It's the mushrooms that do the breakdown. So the mulch and the compost is the perfect home for a mushroom. not a plant. That's their home is the dead plant. The plant's home is silt, you know, quartz. Sand, silt, clay, it's all quartz. That's the plant's home. So, yes.
You mentioned earlier about on other fruit trees about branches that sprout straight up. Is that true of citrus? Because I have some fairly juvenile citrus and they're kind of bushy, but I got a couple sprouts going straight. Are those ones I want to discourage or trim?
Not necessarily. Now, if you want to keep your plant real small, just cut them off. But if you want them to get any size at all, those are your fruit. That's your future trunk. So you can just leave that. If they're parallel, you can either bend one out or just cut it off so that you don't have two going straight, or two or three going to straight the same place. But that will make a new tier of branches above everything else.
Gary, I attempted to graft a Pinkerton onto a Forte avocado, okay, so that I had A and B varieties on one plant. I chopped the top out, Pinkerton in, it didn't take, and then I got a side branch come off. I pulled that up so that it becomes another leader, and hopefully when sign exchanges on again, I'll whack that off and see if I can regraft it. You know, is that the right thing to do? Just to let it come up as a leader, one of those side branches?
Yeah, we heard a talk from a gentleman once who was regrafting avocados. He liked to work with the new growth that comes straight up. So you chop something on that Forte back severely, and then it sprouts out this new growth, and you graft that.
Okay.
You know, sometime in the spring when it's warmer, they like to be grafted. I think he said May is the best month to graft avocados.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Speaking of avocados, do you have to prune them at all? Just to keep the size down?
Yeah, orchards in the past, what they would do is let the trees grow to 20, 25 foot, and then stump them, and then let them grow back to 20, 25 foot and stump them. Nowadays, I've talked to some of the guys, and they said, oh, we just trim every winter now, just keep them below 12 foot. So you lose some crop when you're trimming every year, but if you trim them, if you stump them every, whatever it is, 10 years, you lose a crop for a year or a couple years. So either way, I mean, no one wants to climb ladders anymore, so just keep pruned at around 10, 12 foot.
And what, do they grow on all kinds of wood, or it has to be one year old growth?
Always the tip, whatever,
On the tip.
I don't know, avocados seem to put on new growth every 3 months, and it's like that growth that just came out can then bloom. Because I'm watching my avocado tree in my house, it's now making flowers again right now.
What variety?
Well, that's a Carmen.
Okay. I'd love to get a graft
That
of
was the
that.
same question actually about the avocados. And out of avocados, do you get rid of the lower branches too, the ones that might touch the ground?
Doesn't do anything to help or hurt the tree. You know, you want avocados. It's very important not to let the trunk sunburn. So you might want to keep all the foliage you can on an avocado tree.
It seems like the mango is also putting out new growth in bursts, you know.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's it. Okay, thank you.
Could I take the trash, please? Could I take the things
Sure.
Yeah, you glass.
A dog, barking dog.
I told my neighbor I need to borrow your dog.
You need it all the time. Well, you're gonna have critters.
But I
That's
wanted
right where you are.
Because I've got somebody's house, the white notebook, white
I'm
paper.
gonna do too much this time here. We do most of it ridiculously.
No, I didn't look at that. They sold it over.
This time of year, you can rearrange the branches.
I did.
seriously, I mean, you find them on the lawn. There's,
Typically,
I wanna know if I can talk
the weather fits them.
Mine's in the ground, it's the shade tree I have.
For me, yeah, but for me, it's blocked out the view.
Well, it's just that, I mean, and I have talked with you many times.
Okay, I'm gonna, yeah, I'm gonna talk it, I think.
I'll show you the top soil.
Yeah, let's go.
equestrian.
Should I just leave them alone, or?
I would thin them down. Both parts aren't gonna kill you by branching, it's not that big a deal.
John.
But, yeah, they might start losing some branches if you want to, so thin them down to maybe
One of the other oes he said works really well there.
Now, the other little one,
Can we drop the hat?
it's got a branch, I got a question. I drew a picture of the trunk, these little leaves.